Sir, welcome to Forum Daily.
Thank you for having me.
Now, some Canadians are concerned about the legality of vaccine mandates, sir, so let's get into it. Can you briefly explain their concerns for our viewers, sir?
They could have several origins. Some could be based in provincial human rights or privacy legislation. Some could be on collective agreements in unionized work atmospheres and duty to accommodate employees who won't be vaccinated. But most of them tend to be based on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and rights to bodily integrity, to mobility, and to freedom of conscience and religion, if that is the basis of the objection to getting vaccinated, that are guaranteed in the Charter.
Now, I want to get into a column you recently wrote, and you mentioned that the legal gray zone of vaccine mandates can be made black and white through legislation. So what does that mean? Can you unpack that for our viewers?
Well, one of the reasons that it's uncertain the extent to which mandates would be legal is because of specific collective agreements, or because that many of the rights that people are saying is their basis for objecting to being vaccinated can be limited. Rights to bodily integrity, for instance, in the Charter are also guaranteed only in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. And all rights can be reasonably limited if demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. And in many circumstances, I suspect that mandatory vaccination could be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. But that's an inherently fact-specific analysis that leads, I think, to many governments and other entities like universities to be reluctant to impose vaccine mandates. That could be made clear, however, through legislation, both in terms of legislation that could amend privacy legislation that may otherwise apply or override the Charter.
All right, sir, let's take a deeper look into this charter here. Can you briefly summarize Section 33 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, also known as the notwithstanding clause for our viewers?
Section 33 allows a legislature to say that a law will operate notwithstanding provisions that are otherwise in the Charter. It basically is the legislature's trump card on top of judicial interpretations of certain rights. It can only be used for 5 years, and it can be only used for certain rights. But most of those rights it can be used for are the bases for people objecting to mandatory vaccination.
And what are some of the criticisms of using the notwithstanding clause? Because we haven't seen it used that much during the pandemic.
No, it hasn't been, and that could perhaps because the time it takes people to get to court is not a short period of time. But on top of that, it is a controversial provision of the Charter because it allows a legislature to essentially use its power to trump minority rights. And that's one of the reasons we have the Charter in the first place, which is to protect minority rights.
All right, sir, just about a minute and a half left here, but what are your main arguments for using the notwithstanding clause?
Well, first, it would eliminate the legal gray zone. And insofar as that legal gray zone is causing certain entities to be reluctant to act, this would provide them with immunity from suit. Many entities, large corporations, universities, tend to be as scared at the threat of litigation as the threat of liability, and that would help them in this regard. Even for those who tend to be opposed to the use of the notwithstanding clause, frequently agree it could be used in an emergency. What we seem to be in an emergency. And for people concerned about, I guess, what you might call a eternity of restrictions on liberty, the notwithstanding clause only lasts for 5 years. So there would be a sunset to the use of the mandates.
All right, sir, just about 45 seconds left here, but why have governments in Canada not used the notwithstanding clause so far during these unprecedented times?
Perhaps because it's not necessary. And in certain cases, it likely isn't necessary. Also because it's just very politically unpopular to do so. Whenever it is used, it's a big news story and controversy. This, though, might be an instance where the public is more sanguine about its use than is frequently the case, as you noted, regarding Canadians' overall opinion on this.